to modernize infrastructure delivery, accelerate strategic projects, and strengthen public-private partnerships. She's also been a champion of infrastructure-led economic recovery, inclusive development, and the localization of industrial value chains. With a background in governance, engineering oversight, and economic planning, she plays a central role in coordinating infrastructure, investing that supports job creation, spatial equity, and long-term national competitiveness. Thank you, Minister, for honoring us. Excuse me? There's a lot of noise in there. Please settle down. Thank you. I would like to call to the fore Ms. Nardos Bekele Thomas, who is the CEO for ADA and NAPAD. She's a distinguished global development leader. And the first woman to serve as CEO of the African Union Development Agency. She oversees continental programs on infrastructure, industrialization, health, agriculture, and governance, driving the African Union's implementation of Agenda 2063. A former UN resident coordinator with decades of diplomatic experience, she is recognized for her unwavering commitment to transforming Africa's development trajectory, strong institutions, sustainable financing, and partnerships that prioritize people-centered growth. A round of applause, please, for Ms. Bekele Thomas. Lastly, I'd like to call to the podium Dr. James Mwangi. He is the Group Managing Director and CEO for Equity Group Holdings. Dr. James Mwangi is one of Africa's foremost business leaders and a pioneer in inclusive finance. As the CEO of Equity Holdings, he has led the transformation of the organization in one of the continent's largest financial institutions, expanding access to banking, digital services, and enterprise development for millions. His vision has driven major investments in education, entrepreneurship, community upliftment through the Equity Foundation. Widely recognized for championing sustainable financing and African-led development, he brings deep insight into how financial ecosystems can unlock infrastructure, growth, and shared prosperity. And I've also recently learned that he is also a philanthropist and has given so much for the inclusion of the underprivileged. A round of applause for Dr. James Mwangi. Before we begin, I would also like to extend a welcome to our interpreters, our sign language interpreters, and a round of applause for Sinovuyo and Nicolene, who will be our sign language interpreters this evening. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very important conversation. I trust that you will observe the house rules and please have your phones on silent. Minister, do you mind if we start with you? Thank you. You have done a lot of work in terms of integrating infrastructure and delivering in your portfolio. Can we discuss a little bit about how you have introduced more governance and oversight, especially when it comes to public-private partnerships, and how that has enabled, the delivery of the work that your department does?
Thank you very much, and good evening to my fellow panelists first, and all the guests who are in attendance here. Well, I come from the Department of Human Settlements.
Oh.
Yes, I'm representing my sister, Pemi Majodina, the Minister of Water and Sanitation, which is the big length of infrastructure under our economic cluster, amongst other things, of course, as part of the social cluster as well, because they go hand in hand. But now going into your question directly, one, it's more about collaboration first, to ensure that we maximize on every effort that government is making. And I think that's why our work is clustered now. Of course, there are cross areas in which all the departments will belong to, and push the policy first in terms of what are the key imperatives that our country would like to drive. So infrastructure is a catalyst, in fact, taken from our priorities of the 7th administration, a catalyst to make sure that we create more jobs, but also ensure that the infrastructure is developed so that it opens even other opportunities, even for business people or any other person who may not necessarily be a government employee. So we look at it as a way in which it needs then to enable all of us to be able to either utilize our roads, they need to be properly built. You need to have sound human settlements, not only houses, but a whole component of infrastructure in relation to a settlement which includes schools and priorities. We need blended financing, obviously, which takes us through to public-private partnerships, which are ideal for what we need to do, but open up a door for business and any other external source that could be able to assist the fiscus of government in terms of trying to accelerate the delivery of infrastructure. Coming from minimum resources, mostly, what it indicates is that the fiscus is never enough. The money that government has is never enough to fund the needs of infrastructure that we have. But coming with the history of inequality as well, what it has taught us is that there are areas which previously were highly advantageous and many who were disadvantageous, and they still remain towards the rural edge of the provinces like Eastern Cape, Limpopo, KwaZulu-Natal, and many others, which means we need to go and accelerate and change them in terms of our spatial outlook to ensure that we drive more of the infrastructure towards that direction to make sure that every South African can be able to benefit. If you look lastly into the figures of how then will you drive the economy in relation to utilizing the infrastructure as a catalyst, water in particular. In our South African context, it is a right. We all have a right to access to water, but you also treat it as a business through our entities, where yes, they have an administrative fee that they charge. We have indigent policy where we supply to the poor and the old, people with disabilities, but beyond the supply that gets to be given, everybody needs to be able to pay for it, so that you ring fence that money for the development and ensuring that you then roll out through a bulk system into rural areas so that they too can be beneficiaries of our infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'll follow up with another question. Thank you. If we look at, and specifically leading into the question of housing, if we look at inequality, infrastructure, and especially housing, is a key reason why also we are where we are. If we use, you mentioned the word spatial inequality. If you are on the outskirts of industrialization, if you do not have access to healthcare, you do not have access to schooling, you do not have access to water, to electricity, you cannot actively participate in the economy, right? So we understand in terms of obviously the role of capital, but when we look at the role of planning and how planning is happened in terms of infrastructure specifically, what is happening and what are we doing to ensure that we reduce the access, or we improve the access rather, for people who are on the outskirts? Because capital is not necessarily going to solve that, because right now people are just booming and staying in places, but the infrastructure, there's no clear planning, there's no clear, rules of engagement that says this is how a clinic's going to fit in, this is how a school's going to fit in, which means as the population booms, people remain without access. How are you looking at that and solving for that?
Well, I think the rules of engagement that they possibly it could be how often do we educate our people on how to do and how to utilize them. And our human settlement policy is very clear. It's providing for the needy, the social housing that government provides for free. And it's a sad day for us that sometimes even this enabler to our society and to our poor people sometimes don't get to be appreciated the way I believe it should. I mean, I can't take a house coming from a fiscus and the taxpayers from South Africans, don't utilize it for even a year and then let's sell it at not even a value of what it was built for. But we have taken it through as part of what we need to do in educating our people of what is the importance anyway of owning. But I mean, currently we've got around 4,075 informal settlements. But everyone who's in informal settlement does not necessarily qualify for our policy. Our policy, what does it say? It needs to be the elder, a person with disability, a child-headed household. I had a very fascinating story. One person of my age roughly said, no, both my parents are dead. I said, but not, you don't qualify. When we talk child-headed household, we talk about a high school child who, for whatever reason, would have lost both parents, and he or she is taking care of the younger siblings who are at primary school. As government, we take the responsibility of making sure that we house them, and then social development will take them to school. They will receive food for free. They'll go to a free school paying, and your social network covers them right all the way up to university in terms of payment. Now, this is a deliberate intention of creating equality. We're investing in municipalities more because our regulatory environment mandates that it's municipalities which must create settlements, plan them proper, allocate them proper. We've got interventions and measures which are saying now in the city of Ekurhuleni, Johannesburg, eThekwini, and all that, we're reclaiming back all the government land that is either not utilized or underutilized or even hijacked some of the old buildings. You might have seen we're evacuating people who are staying there with an intention of renovating them and bring everybody into the city center where they will actually benefit on the convenience of where they work, live, and can be given an opportunity to stay. We do not compel a person who's there in the rural areas who still believe it's comfortable for me to stay in Mkandul. But we do build a house, remove them from the mud houses, put them in more protected houses, create employment in ways in which your small business, the Department of Tourism, Public Works through their EPWP programs and all, try and create a life that could also be lived with people making a choice of where they want to live. But we must face the beast called inequality, a road that divides the haves and the have not. And you've got quite a number of that in South Africa, a very ugly picture, actually, where even where we have land, for example, in Palito, eThekwini, and we want to put houses, and they will say, Minister, you're bringing your poor people next to us here, and their houses are going devaluing our own houses. So we've opted to put what we will call show houses and projects which we have completed. Just next to the Gautrain in Midrand, we've got a grand central building, beautiful. It's very inside town, close to public amenities. We'll be getting one building close to the railway station here in the city of Johannesburg. We want to do the same. We've got Konobia and Conradi in Western Cape in the city of Cape Town. Our policy is municipalities must bring people outside the urban edge of the cities, 30 kilometers inward, not 30 kilometers outward. In that way, you're trying to redress. It is a bit costly because the land that is in private owners is made to be very expensive. But we have taken a principled decision. Let's exhaust government land first, which is within that, so that we minimize on the cost of buying land and we don't spend in buying land. We take old government buildings from any other department, we repurpose, and we're able to accommodate. In eThekwini, we bought a building from Transnet, which used to be a training college. We're repurposing it now to be a facility for young couples who would want to stay in Durban and work there, so that they're not compelled to go and stay in. So it's a multi-purpose bag that we could be able to utilize. But I think we genuinely have to address the issue of inequality, which emanates from spatial discrimination, where the history of our country comes from. Otherwise, we will see no equality. You will still get a lot of people who die on the road because they are traveling from the area where they sleep to the area where they walk. I mean, work every morning and every evening. It's just not acceptable still.
No, absolutely agree, Minister. And a big part of that is also ensuring that there's economic activity within reach for everyone, because housing without economic access is going to be still very limiting. Ms. Bekele Thomas, thank you very much. I'm moving over to you. You look so lovely this evening. I'm going to put you in the hot seat a little bit. I read a piece from Colin Coleman recently. I don't know if you know Colin Coleman. He's the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, and he spoke specifically to the growth that we're going to see in Africa. And I mean, you have such a valued insight in terms of not just South Africa, but Africa as a whole and the role that we play. And he looked at the forecasting that we're going to go into becoming a $44 trillion economy from a $3 trillion economy. And essentially what that means, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're going to see what we're seeing. It's almost, you can, liken it to a gold rush in South Africa, Africa being the place to be. However, we've seen how this plays out in the past, where Africa is a place of extraction and we are being used for the resources that we have. We're going to have one of the youngest populations in the world. We're going to see more booming in terms of the economic growth. But essentially, even though this growth is going to be happening, it's such rapid scale, and we're also going to see mass migration to Africa, we still know that many people will be excluded. In fact, in the piece that he wrote, what he has stated is that, and I've done more research on this, is that what we'll see is that more people are going to become marginalized. More people are going to become poorer, despite the fact that the continent is becoming wealthier. You have a wealth of experience, and I would really like to tap into your insights into how do you think we can leverage infrastructure and we can leverage sustainable growth solutions and finance to help reduce that marginalization, and also introduce policies that will actually ensure that there's inclusion.
Thank you very much. I think, it touches on everything. So it's really writing a book. But I'll try to segment that. There is the national, at the country level, actions that need to be taken, which are clear from this morning until tonight. We were talking about, inclusion, participation as a vital ingredient for social transformation. And it's very critical and very important, because we cannot do without our children. We cannot do without this young creativity, innovative mind. We cannot do without the women. We cannot do without the people with, I say, creative ability, not disability, but I call them creative ability, because really the fact that they are managing without having all the qualities that we have really is a creativity. And that is what is missing. And we have to have policies. Minister, in the presidency is here, and I'm so glad that I've got the two ministers. From the national perspective, what I see missing is coordination. Coordination. Each ministry will take its own sector as if it is operating in silos, as if it's growing in silos. And we need to have that thinking of working together and approaching it in a holistic manner. That is at the government level, both vertical, which is from the federal or national to the provincial to the district to the communities. There should be an alignment and vertically aligned planning, vertically aligned budgeting, vertically aligned accountability framework, but also horizontal. Ministers should work together because there is no health sector with the Ministry of Health. Health is really everything. Health is nutrition, so it touches on agriculture. Health is education because you need to really sensitize the people. Health is finance because you need to get the money. Health is planning. Health is industry because you need to develop the pharmaceutical industries. So it is an integrated approach that we lack in Africa. And in that integrated approach, some countries have come, and this is very important, I'm sorry, because when I was the UN resident coordinator in Kenya, remember during the COVID time, how did we resolve the COVID situation? Because we had a holistic approach. The government decided that it's not going to be a Ministry of Health affair, it's going to be a whole government, not only a whole government, a whole society. We brought the private sector, the foundation, what was it called? We created a foundation where we mobilized resources, private sector were active, active respondent to the whole COVID. Research institutions were working day and night, technology centers were on top of, all these technologies that they think they could bring out. So that's how we managed. But it shouldn't be a crisis management that would bring us together. It should be an all day and all, what do you call it, day to day activity of the government. And I always say that, how can a planning minister plan without talking to the learning institutions? Because you need the doctors, you need the engineers, you need the nurses. They should plan with you. You will say, I need X number of doctors. They will tell you, okay, for X number of doctors, these are the inputs that I require. And that should be in the planning. Research institutions should be really within the planning at the center, core integral part of the planning. So I think, there is so much disconnect. We need to bring all these things together. And if that happens, I tell you, every country, big or small, will make a difference.
So, but oh, sorry, continue. Please
Okay.
continue.
And then that is at national level. To me, that is very critical and very important. And also, funding is there. The Solidarity Fund of the COVID was a contribution of individuals, the private sector that came. And I've seen and I've worked in many countries where solidarity among the population, the citizens, made a difference. Okay, it's controversial, but it's solidarity fund among nationals that made the Ethiopian dam to be what it is today. You know, but it's very important that we believe in ourselves and we belong to a country and we are part and parcel of that country in terms of the transformation process. But on the regional side, we talk about regional integration, and the core ingredient to regional integration, is actually infrastructure. So we have got the program for infrastructure development for Africa, a big program that would connect the north to the south, east to west, and all countries connected, having one big market and benefiting, from the big population, consumers, and also the big market. But in order to do that, we need that connection. I tell you, we have got 69 projects that are there in the PIDA program. And these 69 projects are from railway to roads to digital to water. They are, all these different, infrastructure programs. And, while we did that for the last 10 years, 11 years at the review, we realized that building 100 kilometers of road is not going to be, giving us the result we want. But around that 100 kilometers, we need an integrated corridor, which would bring the industrial zones, the agriculture parks, settlement, and everything that it requires, including transmission lines and, energy, which are enablers. And these would create, would unlock all the potential of Africa. It will create employment. It will make sure that that we benefit from an integrated market. South Africa can trade with its neighbors freely without any problem. And then we have got the One Stop Border, initiative, which is really to make sure that, this logistics flow is smooth. And I think if we really manage that, we'd be able to do, what we think is critical and very important for Africa. A country in Africa by itself will not succeed. 54 countries benefiting from this large market and large consumer base will succeed. And for that, we need infrastructure. Just recently, just to add, we were in Luanda. We had a Luanda Financing Summit. And we were able to present 38 bankable projects. And just to show you that the 38 bankable projects, we mobilized $18 billion in 2 days. The African Alliance, yeah, we need a clap, yes. Yeah, it worked. And that was a follow-up to the Dakar. So, it was very important for us to present bankable projects. So one of the missing link was really having these intentions translated in terms of bankable projects. That is also de-risking. And ourselves at the African Union Development Agency, what we do is translate all these programs or whatever into bankable programs to present to investors. These are really viable projects. They're viable projects. From all over the world, investors were there to discuss these projects. Now, the funding part is very critical because as you can, you must be reading everywhere, we have gaps, a lot of gaps. Just on the PITA programs on infrastructure, there is $130 to $170 billion annual gap. Okay? It's huge. When you take, the infrastructure in terms of health, we need $69 billion annually to make sure that Africa prospers. Okay? When you take about energy, we have a gap of $3 trillion, but when we break it, it will be $100 billion plus, annually. So all these, gaps need to be met. But it's up to now, we depended on public budget, and that's why you see African governments indebted, okay? We depended on grants, we depended to some extent on concessional funding, but all this blended financing plus private investment, is the only way to make it happen. And in order to do that, like you said, we need to de-risk, we need to have guarantee funds. And today, we are creating that by bringing solidarity among the development finance institutions. The Alliance of African Multilateral Development Banks, with a membership currently of 15 financial institutions, is really responding to that. Just in LFS, they took, among the 69, they took 13 projects and they dedicated $1.5 billion as a seed capital to attract, private capital from outside. Out of which they dedicated $100 million for us to develop more and more bankable projects. If we do that in industrialization, in agriculture, in all these sectors, we will succeed. Funding, to me, is not a problem because we have the funds. $1 trillion stuck there in sovereign funds, stuck there in pension funds, stuck there in other sovereign assets. Money, illicit financing that flows out of Africa. The capital flow from, all our youngsters that are in the diaspora. If we manage all this, we will be able to fund some of our programs. And funding is not disbursement. When we talk about development, let's forget about disbursement, expenditure. We have to create mechanisms and systems for investment. Our infrastructure programs are investable projects. Our industrial programs are investable programs. Our manufacturing, pharmaceutical industries that we want to promote, we want to make sure that we are producing 26 medical products are investable programs. So if we do that, I think we will arrive and we will realize our dreams.
Thank you very much for that. A round of applause, please. I have to ask two snap questions. You have a bird's eye view from the perspective where you are at. Do you see these solutions as people-centric or project-centric? Because it is the social summit, and ultimately we have to ask the question, is it people-centric? And are the people going to benefit? Truly. And secondly, do you see, looking to the future 2063, Agenda 2063, that the leaders of Africa are actually collaborative in their efforts to get there?
Thank you very much. To start with, when we talk about, project, it's a means. The end, people. Every single thing that we do should be people-centered. Every governance structure that we put in place should have citizens at the center. Everything should be around our people. Otherwise, we will be what we are today and even worse, right? So, we have to be people-centered. And without the people, you cannot do anything anyway. So that is very important. The projects, bankable projects, is really to garner the investment to respond to the needs of the people. So that would, I hope, clarify something. But certainly you touched on something that is critical. We had a review of our infrastructure program for the last 10 years that we did last year, and we came out with some bottlenecks. The first bottleneck was the fact that, we were really not paying attention to project preparation. And project preparation is really a risk mitigation measure. As a financier, you can agree with me. So, and it requires money. So we need to invest in that. The second thing is political will. The political will was so important because you cannot have, a collaborative, road or infrastructure program unless there is harmonized regulatory framework, unless countries talk to each other, unless they're willing. It shouldn't be left to individuals. That project starts when 2 leaders or 3 leaders are in good terms and they stop when they are not really in good terms. It shouldn't be that because we forget the bigger picture, and therefore we're advocating for authorities that manage this regional infrastructure that are autonomous. And in most cases in the Eastern Africa region, it has worked. And in West Africa, where there are authorities for railroad authorities or road authorities that are joint, then it works because, it insulates this transformative work, this project from political interference. And the third thing is capacity. You need capacity in each country. You need the engineers. More and more now we're going into finance because that is what gives us money. We need to really make sure that we have, that we give incentive to our young ones to go into engineering because we need them. We need them to do, to be really there for us because we need all these inputs that we require. And it's a proper planning that is needed, not only for today, but for tomorrow. Capacity to negotiate, capacity to mobilize resources, capacity to manage, all these capacities are really needed. And therefore, our problem has been one big country would do its part, then, when the next neighboring country, a weaker country, cannot do the road. I give you an example from Algiers to Nigeria. Now the missing link is in Niger, and it requires solidarity, understanding the fact that it's only when that chain of road is built that we would benefit from this infrastructure that we have invested in. So political will is very critical and very important. Visionary leadership is critical. Building the capacity and making sure that the whole government works for purpose is also critical. So yes, you're right.
No, I
Political will is-
absolutely agree with you, and thank you for that. You said something so interesting, and I'll circle back in a moment on that. But even in terms of the integration, when we look at that, whether it's housing, in terms of infrastructure, whether it's the integration of education, nutrition, health, it is so critical. What we see, for instance, if we say we want engineers, and we don't have proper nutrition from the beginning, you're not going to get there. We have a situation currently in South Africa where we have a number of youth, children very young, where we identify the problem at education level, but the problem starts where they are not sufficiently, don't have sufficient nutrition at a young age. So when they have to learn, they are incapable of keeping up with their peers. So it is so fundamental that everything is integrated, and integration is such a key word from what I take away from what you've said, and for us to collaborate and look at everything cohesively as an ecosystem. Thank you very much. Dr. James Mwangi, thank you very much. I'd like to move over to you, if that's okay. You're in my space in terms of funding and financing, speak my language. And I want to talk a little bit first, if you can just share with us a little bit before we go into talking a little bit about the finance and financing instruments around infrastructure, some of the work that you've done to really unlock capital for the average person.
Thank you very much. Equity Group is composed of banks and insurance companies, and it has a customer base of 23 million customers. And so we have really focused on unlocking financing to those customers. The biggest tool we have used is Breaded Finance, where we have called in philanthropists, foundations, development banks, commercial banks, pension funds, so that we can create funding that is appropriate for purpose or fit for purpose. If we really need long-term, pensions are very good at that. Development banks are at that. When it comes to microfinance and small and medium enterprises, grants are very necessary so that you can capacitate through training and you can de-risk through credit sharing guarantees. So that kind of collaboration has opened huge opportunities for us. And as a result, we have had to operate with an economic engine made of the commercial entities and a social engine made of a very huge foundation, which is a platform for collaboration by all the partners, so that capacitation and de-risking goes before finance. And the most powerful instrument we have seen is de-risking through guarantees, and then capacitating the borrowers through training, so that they have the same competence with people who are properly trained, because they're in a competitive market.
No, thank you very much for that. I'm a big fan of de-risking and especially guarantees. I think we need to incorporate more guarantees to reduce the cost of capital as well as improving access to capital for the average person, especially in terms of small businesses. I want to talk a little bit about some of the instruments that that exist currently and how we can look at social and infrastructure in terms of new blended instruments. Usually when we talk about social, it's more in the context of ESG and impact investing. Yet without unlocking socioeconomic development and improvement, all of this is not possible. But it seems that the two worlds, infrastructure on this side and infrastructure financing and social financing, is separate. Like we're speaking two different things. And yet we just spoke about the fact that everything is for the people. So if it is relevant for the people, how can we look to solutions from a capitalization perspective that can actually bridge the gap between the two?
There are two concepts that Honorable Minister and my sister CEO of NEPAD has talked about. The first one is integrated approach. It's the same people. So when you really look at that perspective, the same people who require social investment, education and health are the same people who are utilizing infrastructure. The second concept you have talked about, that was talked about, is people-centered development. If we're really talking about financing, it really needs to focus on people. What are the requirements of the people at a point in time? What is fit and proper to enable our people? And that is then the investment we need to make, both from the social perspective and from the financial perspective. It is when we do financing in silos, these are social investment, and fail to plug and play into a coordinated ecosystem approach. The issue of dealing with the transactional financing, I think that's where we got it wrong. We need to build ecosystem financing that consumes both social financial investments and also financial investments. Yeah.
No, absolutely agree. And I think I'm going to put you in the hot seat here a little bit because that's all great. Yet, when we look at Africa, capital is very expensive. The debt instruments that we have also seem unattainable. If you look at, for instance, South Africa, we've got amazing financial institutions. I think one of the best in the world, yet it's so segregated from the average person, right? Sometimes we're doing a lot to shift and limit that gap. Yet the cost of capital, Africa across the board, is so expensive, number one, even for our governments. That's why, if you look at government spend on debt, it's expensive. It is very expensive. And then when it comes to the infrastructures that we want to develop, and we just heard some of those numbers are staggering of the type of capital and the numbers of capital that we need to bring in, how do we reduce that cost and that burden in order for us to be able to capacitate for these infrastructures, yet not pay so much as Africa?
I'm glad that both of us come from the same industry, so we can really debate. We know very well interest is a market price. No institution creates interest rates. And essentially, if you look at the foundation of interest rate computation, it will take into account inflation, because that really is the starting point, and then it will take the cost of risk. So when you look at African economies, most of them, inflation, most of them target 5 to 7%. That then becomes the starting point of pricing money. Because even if you charge 7, when inflation is 7, you're just you are just recovering the cost of inflation. That is where the biggest challenge is. Can we strengthen our microeconomic factors and stabilize them so that then we have stable? I always compare African interest rates with the Western world. You see most of them inflation is below 1. And our inflation is on average between 5 and 7, and sometimes going all the way to 10. So we start at different bases. The second aspect is the issue of risk. And when you look at risk and the cost of doing business in Africa, it's what has been talked about by the minister, the cost of infrastructure. Where if you look in some countries, including power, every bank will provide generators to its branches because there is no power. That really goes to cost of financing and goes as a component to interest. So we need also to build the infrastructure that reduces the cost of doing business so that those costs are not passed over to the customers. Of course, there is consideration for Africa to push its case that there is perceived risk and actual risk. Data doesn't seem to support the risk premium that Africa pays. The experiences are that Africa pays its debts, but when it comes to borrow, it's priced as if Africa doesn't pay its debt. So the risk premium is something that we all need to debate. We all need to assert so that it reduces the cost of borrowing.
Thank you very much. Round of applause for that, please. Very excellent insights. Excellent. I really appreciate your answer. And you know, when I was studying economics, which was a very long time ago, I look a little bit younger than I am. So, you know, one of the first things we taught was gold backed. You know, and we had this debate, and I remember it was such a vivid debate. One of the first in university was around, but if we have the resources, we have the people, we have everything, why are we paying so much as Africa? And I think you've answered that in terms of the risk. How do we leverage what we have and start, you know, kind of putting a stake in the ground to say we have the power to negotiate better as Africans?
I think that you have touched the most sensitive issue. It's where we play in the value chains. In Africa, we play at raw material level. So we get the lowest value. I look at, for instance, our natural resources, and you find I'm a small-scale tea farmer. So let's talk about tea, which I understand. When I go to a major hotel around the world, I pay between $5 and $10 for a sachet of 10 grams, the tea bag, when you have your tea in the morning. That's what you see in your bill, you are charged 5 to 7. But when you come to the farmer, the farmer is paid a cent of a dollar. And you wonder, where does $9.9 go to? It goes to those who add value. For us to gain the ability to negotiate, we must be playing at value addition level. We must add value. We trade in raw material and import finished products. And that is where the problem is. And yet, let's look at Africa. Africa has 65% of all arable land in the world. Africa has 62% of all renewable energy that can be developed. But those two are the biggest tools in development, but we have not utilized them. They remain potential.
Oh, wow. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Round of applause. I'm going to leave it there and just go back to some closing remarks. Minister, I'll start with you. And I want to put something in your inbox as you make your closing remarks. Having heard everything and considering what we need most actually is not just infrastructure and housing, but an ecosystem that's going to industrialize,
Yes.
create access,
Yeah.
and enable our people to get out of poverty themselves. We are hardworking. I mean, look, go to a taxi rank at 4 a.m. in the morning and it's packed, right? But what are the things that we can do to enable those things, and what can government do to enable those things to help us move from where we are now to access and enablement and growth?
I just want to make an example in responding to that, into the journey of the G20 that brought us to this social summit and ultimately the handover over the weekend. The African Union brought all the African countries together here in South Africa in preparation for this G20 in the Water Investment Infrastructure Summit that they had here in Cape Town in September. And amongst themselves, they were able to raise close to about 12 billion of projects that are not looking into where the space is, because there's interconnectedness of supply that can make us strong and look beyond the boundary of I am a South African. But when the Lesotho Highlands has got more water basket, you look just away because you can't think you can engage in the Zambezi Highland, which can give you more water. To maximize, for example, on your food basket in Venda, which is very close to the confluence of Botswana, Zimbabwe in this instance, or Lesotho Vaal River project that is coming. So as a result, they were able to identify across the continent 40 mega catalytic infrastructure water-related projects, because they want to respond to the issue that 60% of arable land is in Africa. Then why are we poor? Why are we hungry? Why do we have statistic of stunted children? If we look at it as us resolving the problem as South African individually or as a Kenyan individual, that's where we make a mistake. Because there are areas of strength, if we maximize on them. Where is your area of strength in tea and coffee? Is in Kenya? What does Ghana have? Etc. And you create that ecosystem. If we are going to think the ecosystem is related to my country and your country, we are not going to win. But what does civilization teach us, whether we like the lesson or not, is that people evolve. They know what they deserve. They know what they want. If you don't offer it, they try and follow it where they think it is there. It becomes a responsibility for the one also who receives to make sure that you define what could be developmental in engagement with your sister country and create an entire region and a scope of a continent that could be able to do everything for themselves. I've got a challenge on how we define the ecosystems, which just looks at a small pocket of who we are, because ecosystems don't talk like that. And that is why when you have got disaster, which for me it's the best lesson. In one night, El Nino can hit Mozambique and come to South Africa, hit Botswana and move all the way to Namibia and on the edge of Lesotho, and all of us will run amok, trying to help one another and share. And what did she say? It can't be disaster that teach us collaboration. Because COVID example as well was disaster. The example where we collaborate more, we remember to save life, but we don't remember to plan for this life adequately so that even a potential of each and every one of us in the continent can be able to solve ourselves. I think we need more of such discussion and engagements. And I do hope that they will not end because G20 is an event and it passes, but it will rather help us to cement the relations so that we can emphasize on this collaboration for us to be able to achieve integration. If we are not one, we are not together, our continent will not go anywhere. Thank you.
A round of applause for the minister. Your words give me a lot of confidence in our leadership and the way forward, and that you truly are passionate about what you're speaking about and what you're doing. Thank you so much, Minister. Another round of applause, please. That's a powerful, powerful view and sentiment to have, especially, considering that we're hosting G20. It's not just about hosting. It's about what comes next. They call it planting seeds for the trees that you won't sit under. And this is essentially what we're doing today. Thank you so much. I want to just move on, Ms. Bekele Thomas, to you for some closing remarks. And I want to just maybe also put something in your inbox, as is my nature. What do you believe we can highlight for African leaders, given everything that you've said, for them to take home and consider in terms of how we integrate and how we move forward? There's so much in terms of planning that's been done and so many strategies. Sometimes it feels like we talk more and do less, but we know that we're doing. And how do we fast track that as a catalyst for our future growth?
I think there are fundamentals in all what we say, and I want to be honest because I'm not a politician, I'm not a business person, so I do not depend on government. So, I can be very, very clear. We have to have governments that think beyond their term. Whatever governments do, it should be beyond them, not their interests. It shouldn't be a popularity, game. It should be something fundamental that they would do that would transform countries. Because we have this tendency of going into, being elected, then our planning is 5 years. Okay, fine. What do I show for my constituency? What do I do? It shouldn't be like that. It should be a long-term transformational thing. That's number one. The second thing is we are, as Africans, we have to have our fundamental values in place. Reclaim our values, our principles. Corruption is killing, our continent. So, bleeding, all these wastages and leakages, we could do so much with that. So that is the second thing. But this is internal, right? But the most important thing is that without collaboration, we cannot function. I mean, solidarity is of critical importance. My sister talked about this solidarity. Lesotho, we are becoming, a continent of paradox. There is abundance and there is poverty. And, we need to really make sure that the solidarity responds to that. The supply and the demand match. Lesotho, water in abundance. Okay, now we're drawing, like you said, the water, flowing to help, South Africa, but also Botswana transmission. These are things that we should do. And this is what integrated programs, connectedness does for us. The most important aspect is industrialization, and I'm glad, my brother, Dr. Mwangi talked about it. The value chain, the supply chain, the forward and backward linkages are critical for Africa. We can't talk about our potential and potential and potential. Potential does not feed people. Potential does not give employment to people. We need to add value. We need to have that chain. We need to beneficiate our critical minerals that are being extracted. Blaming others will not help us. We need to look inward and question ourselves and respond. And that is what I would really, plead to our governments and leaders. We did an impact study to look at each country to identify the growth pillars so that we can build nationally the value chains around those growth pillars, but also regionally we've found, some growth pillars. We have identified 5 clusters which we are working on now, okay, in terms of value chains. The first is agriculture, certainly. We need our agro businesses. We need to feed our people. We need to build dignity pride in ourselves, and we cannot beg for food. The second thing is manufacturing in terms of our pharmaceuticals, because 90% of our medical products come from outside. We need at least to produce our essential products. We have identified 25 essential products with 45 nascent at different levels industries which we can build and be self-sufficient in terms of our vaccines, in terms of our malaria pills. Can you imagine? Antibiotics from India. What kind of, so we need to do that. So pharmaceuticals. The third one is what we call automation. But, to me, automation might not be really, as important as the semiconductors. We need industries for semiconductors, So we have identified around 5 of them, to really build that at a regional, continental level, the value chain, supply chain. What does value chain do? It's not just producing for producing, and inherent in that is employment. We create employment. We make sure that our young ones are engaged in these socioeconomic transformation processes. It's only through value chain that we can create employment for our young ones. It's only through that we can give hope to our next generation and future generation. And I think industrialization is key in terms of our socioeconomic transformation in this continent and building that bigger market for our goods and services, because we have to depend on ourselves. Africa first. And, development should be for Africa by Africans. And I think we should have pride in that. And we have to have a dignified life, as we go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bekele Thomas. You heard it here first. Africa first. Africa, we must take care of our own, and we must take care of each other and play a pivotal role in our own development. Doctor, you have the last word. And I would like to ask, what do you think, as you make some closing remarks, the role of the private sector is and should be in unlocking capital for infrastructure growth?
Thank you very much. A very central question. And to put it in perspective, if we look at the market cap of the listed companies in the world, it's 25% larger than the global GDP. It shows the position of the private sector and the capability of the private sector. I think 2 things come to mind. The first one is creating space for private sector to be involved in development financing because it has huge capital. GDP is lower than the market cap of just a few companies, because the listed companies, whether it's South Africa, whether it's the US, they are much fewer, but their wealth is more than the global GDP. Then we are in an awkward position where private good exceeds public good. So we must rethink the capitalism model.
Yeah. We're seeing around the world, and especially in Asia, where they're moving towards social capitalism. And not saying that capitalism isn't important, but at which point is it no longer about growth, but about individual wealth, accumulation and wealth hoarding, as they state?
Yeah, I think in India, for instance, they have come up with a regulation where 2% of the revenue of a private sector goes to social investment, goes to finance education, goes to finance health. We must really think, how is the private wealth being generated from public resources? If you look, human capital is developed using public resources, but goes to work for the private sector. Shouldn't the private sector be involved in development of the human capital of the future? So those are the arguments that we need to really argue between ourselves, and particularly here in Africa.
No, absolutely. And all private sector also benefits from it. So it is very important. As we close off, I want to say thank you firstly to the Minister for her grace, as my brief got the title wrong, so I apologize for that, but thank you for your grace, Minister. You have been exceptional. And thank you to our panelists for your insights and your knowledge. It is truly world-class, and I hope we all walk away here a little bit wiser, a little bit more ready to get involved in the change that we want to see. Thank you very much. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. I know we started a little bit late, so our timing is a bit off this evening. We're moving on to the People's Corner, where each of the following speakers will have 3 minutes to make some closing remarks. And I do hope that my brief has all the titles correct this time. So I'm going to assume that everything is correct. We are going to have a few speakers, and each speaker has the opportunity to make some closing remarks and also some remarks around what they believe are key insights around the social summit and their experience in terms of what they want to leave with the audience today. First, I would like to call to the podium the Honorable Minister Sindisiwe Chikunga. Thank you very much, Minister. The podium is yours.
Oh, okay. This one is better. No, thank you very much, Program Director, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply privileged to join my colleagues in contributing to this important side event that is themed Solidarity in Action. And it is taking place on the margins of the G20 Social Summit. And this summit remains a vital platform for civil society organizations, social movements, government, of course, and our grassroots representatives to engage directly with G20 policy processes by elevating voices often relegated to the margins. Our G20 presidency theme of solidarity, equality, and sustainability, it underscores our commitment to making this a G20 presidency of the African continent. And we do this in solidarity with and in recognition of Africa's increasingly catalytic role at the forefront of global well-being. For us, solidarity reflects our vision for a people-centered, development-oriented, and inclusive future. In the spirit of solidarity in action, as an empowerment of women working group, we refuse to treat gender-based violence and femicide as a side issue. As the empowerment of women working group, we elevated it to the core, to be the core priority and secured unprecedented global consensus. So we had 3 priorities, and among them was gender-based violence and femicide. I must report that all G20 member states, but of course one, agreed with us that violence against women requires a crisis-level intervention, coordinated multilateral response, and of course one comparable to the response mechanisms mobilized for pandemics or economic shocks. The fact that we could not adopt our full declaration and instead delivered a chairperson statement, it is itself a testament to our stance. When it comes to gender equality, we were not prepared and are still not prepared to dilute the language or compromise our principles. I must indicate and say here that if you look at what happened at that time, we are indeed facing a lot of pushback. As a matter of fact, when we're discussing our work, we're told not to pronounce words such as gender, all women and girls, SDGs, Beijing Declaration, and Platform for Change. And this is about the pushback that we are seeing today. However, all G20 member states were in support of our statement that we presented. The fact that we could not adopt it was, of course, a show to us that we were not prepared to dilute what we believe in. In addressing gender-based violence and femicide, we believe that it should be addressed at its roots, and we have to deal with its root causes rather than only reacting to its consequences. By elevating policy perspective on the K economy, which was our second priority, into key G20 priorities, we stood shoulder to shoulder with invisible women whose labor powers childcare, elder care, health care, educational care, or education care, and domestic work care. The women who are not here today, the women who dress us, who wash our dresses, who iron them, who make us look good, and who make us able to be seen as leadership. And yet they remain at home and not recognized. Our take is that through a K economy, they must be recognized. They provide the labor that sustains human life and well-being. We mobilized around a fundamental truth that the K economy is not peripheral to economic development, it is central to it. With the K economy as a priority, we ensured solidarity in action through the elevation of the voices of the most forgotten, the women, youth, and persons with disabilities as the contributors and recipients of the K economy. And we did this from Mkondo to Mshwati and to all the 9 provinces, the African continent, and the globe, in Colombia, in China, and in Chile. We have concretized solidarity in action through our G20 legacy projects, including the development of a K economy strategy for South Africa. We have also been invited by the African Union to contribute to the development of an AU convention on the K economy in Africa. And this, we believe, is solidarity in action. Our work on disability inclusion has demonstrated solidarity in action from the very center of the government. As a legacy of our G20 chairship, that is the Empowerment of Women Working Group, we are going to establish, and we are establishing, the Disability Inclusion Nerve Center, a national coordination and innovation hub that will be dedicated to advancing a disability-inclusive society. At the global scale, the All China Women has actually contributed 2.5 million rand towards the establishment of this Disability Inclusion Nerve Center and Data Observatory, a demonstration of solidarity through action. And we invited anyone who has got money to please add some money onto this one. If there is anything that we'll be happy about, is to have the Nerve Center for Disability Inclusion in South Africa. Just this past week, we demonstrated what solidarity in action looks like. In Mshwati, in rural community in KwaZulu-Natal, we convened a G20 rural economy engagement and a women's trade fair in partnership with First Rand Empowerment Foundation, FNB, SIDFA, and local government. The design was intentional to share information, connect women to financial institutions, and in this case, I'm talking about rural women, young and old, with disabilities as well, and host a buyer-driven fair. And this happened just last week. That is immediately after our ministerial meeting. We said, let's take G20 to our rural part of South Africa. And that was after taking it again to Umkhondo, so that the ordinary rural people and farm dwellers can also experience what G20 is about. And they were very excited about it. So for us, financial inclusion is not merely a banking conversation, although that matters. It is fundamentally a justice conversation. It is about ensuring access to affordable digital payments, e-commerce, accessible credit, inclusive markets, and the removal of structural barriers that limit coordination. However, I must emphasize again the issue that we are saying from the most powerful, that is the pushback. And I want us to commit that we are, even if we are being pushed back by the most powerful, but against their pushback, we will offer relentless resilience. Against their pushback, we will offer unyielding resolve. And against their pushback, we shall push back against their pushback. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister Sindisiwe Chikunga, Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth, and People with Disabilities. Another round of applause, please. Next, I'd like to call to the podium Mr. Brian Kokoro, who is the Managing Director for Africa Open Societies Foundation, for his 3 minutes. Thank you, sir.
I stand on existing protocols. I do realize it's late in the day. Friends, the G20 social has focused in South Africa on fundamental questions that pertain to several things, but let me highlight 3 since time is of the essence. The first one is that global development, national development, Pan-African development, in order to be truly transformative, has to center people, their priorities, their issues, and their aspirations. And the one thing that had been missing from African development speak is that a lot of time was invested in poverty fixing, in misery fixing, in addressing the consequences of behaviors of others, omissions perhaps on our part, whether those behaviors were what caused humanitarian, climate and other crises, or things that resulted in the cost of capital for us to be able to transform the state of our economies to be as high as the panel said. We also focused on matters of debt and financial sustainability. Note, I'm not using the term debt sustainability. The fundamental issue, as we heard from earlier panels, is that the entire global system was designed to keep the continent and much of the developing world in a condition of servitude, where any attempt to industrialize, any attempt to transform our economies to achieve any matter of economic or financial sovereignty would actually be scampered by the fact that if you rely on external sources, the cost of that money will be too high. If you try to leverage domestic sources, in some instances, it was controlled. The second thing that was made clear by the G20 or the social is the fact that we ought to have 3 conversations at the same time. The first conversation is addressing global inequity and inequality, the skewed or rigged system that was described on the stage. The second is that we have to leverage non-traditional, including our own resources, in order to develop. What are those sources? Number 1, UNDP just released a report that says the township economy in South Africa is about 1 trillion rands. We know remittances are way larger than foreign direct investment or ODA coming to this continent. Number three, we know that people in their own solidarity economies are generating more value, creating more sustainability. Other women bailing out the state through care work or care economies, or informal, so-called informal sectors that are producing value. So what the G20 social has placed on the table is that Africa needs to create the frameworks that enable it to create wealth in order to enhance its own ability to negotiate better deals, whether in critical minerals or better cost of finance. And that includes things such as the Sovereign Wealth Fund. We are in solidarity as the Open Society Foundations of the idea of achieving financial and economic sovereignty through the creation of wealth infrastructure that is contributed to by Africans and African resources. And we believe that the steps taken by bankers, taken by other African high net worth individuals and ordinary Africans to start contributing to kitties that will be applied in order to de-risk investment in crucial sectors and to address humanitarian and other factors, as well as to create intergenerational wealth and possibilities of transformation is key. Lastly, we want to echo the voices that we've heard across the G20 social, which are that the global economic system, the global financial architecture that has created ultra wealth without accountability or responsibility needs to be revisited. We believe that taxing the uber wealthy or the super wealthy, we believe that building more inclusive financial system and also building social infrastructure that enables people, healthcare workers, that enables caregivers, that enables ordinary citizens to actually thrive is key. Ultimately, Africa will not develop simply from getting more capital. Number one resource is Africa's human resources, that the ability to invest in skills. Otherwise, what will happen is that Africa will talk about critical minerals. But if you look at our universities, our technicons, research institutions, there's not enough investment in building the skills that will leverage and power future economies. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. So we stand in solidarity with what South Africa's presidency of the G20 has done. Place critical agenda on for debate by the whole world and seek to mobilize the rest of the global majority world into a consensus, into a conversation. It is not so much about those who were not here. It is about those who have been here. The world is run by those that participate. And it's high time we realized as Africa that the greatest achievement is to hear South Africa and the African Union speak with one voice. What South Africa has placed on the agenda of G20 reflects and mirrors what Agenda 2063 had put as legacy programs. If it ends here, then we would have failed. This conversation must go beyond Johannesburg, go beyond Washington. This conversation must be a conversation about the people of the world taking back their power to reshape the future of world economies, the future of world governance, the future of multilateralism and global cooperation. We stand in solidarity with G20 Social, and we remain committed to support the sovereign will of people who've been oppressed consistently under chattel enslavement, oppressed under colonialism, oppressed under apartheid, and now seek liberation. No one can tell you not to be free. No one can tell you what words to use for freedom. I want to leave you with this anecdote. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was called a terrorist for daring to say the system that made his people subhuman was unacceptable. What will your generation say? Will you worry about the names that you are called, or will you look at the higher price, which is there is no liberation that happens by permission. There needs to be more than outrage, a commitment to implement what comes out of Johannesburg. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brian Kagoro. Next, I'd like to call to the podium the Honorable Deputy Minister for Sports, Arts and Culture, Ms. Peace Mabe. Ms. Mabe.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I will stand on the protocol that has been established. Distinguished guests, thank you very much for the opportunity. On behalf of my Minister, Gayton Mackenzie, I would like to appreciate the time and the opportunity. Distinguished guests, this summit reminds us that no country can overcome social challenges alone. We need global solidarity, not only in words, but in shared commitments, fair partnerships, and respect for diverse national experiences. True multilateralism must center human beings, not just markets. Civil society is the conscience of any democracy. You bring lived experience, innovation, and proximity to communities in need. As policymakers, we rely on your insight to seek us grounded, honest, and responsive. Without a strong civil society, participation is weakened and democracy becomes hollow. You are the ones who knock on doors, run shelters, organize youth programs, fight for rights, and articulate the concerns that may never make it into boardrooms or negotiation rooms. The summit recognizes that no government can claim to serve its people if it does not listen to its people. And this People's Corner is one of the platforms through which this listening takes place. You delegates gathered here bring lived experiences, expertise, and moral clarity. You bring agency to the global agenda, and you remind all of us that development must be people-centered or it will fail. The arts and culture sector, the portfolio of which I am happy, proud to be part of, is often underestimated in global policy discussions, but never in communities. Whether through music, theater, literature, dance, visual art, or storytelling, culture has always been a powerful force for healing, identity, and transformation. In South Africa, culture has carried us through oppression and into democracy. It continues to build bridges, open minds, and inspire new possibilities. Throughout the world, cultural workers preserve heritage, foster dialogue, and ignite imagination. As policymakers and social partners, we must protect and invest in the arts. We must place artists and cultural workers at the center of social development because culture shapes how societies think, feel, and respond to each other. Distinguished delegates, this People's Corner is more than a session. It is an invitation to speak boldly, to listen deeply, to question fearlessly, and to co-create solutions grounded in dignity, justice, and humanity. Let us embrace the spirit of Ubuntu. I am because we are, because the success of one community strengthens all communities, because the well-being of the world depends ultimately on the well-being of its people. Thank you, Nyabonga.
Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Minister, Ms. Peace Mabe. Next, I'd like to call to the podium Mr. Stefano Palmieri, who is the President of External Relations Section of the European Economic and Social Committee. Mr. Stefano Palmieri, thank you very much. The stage is yours.
Good evening, good night, ladies and gentlemen. No, sister and brother, because only sister and brother stay with me at 8 and 10 to hear my words. Thank you. On behalf of the European Economic and Social Committee, the House of Civil Society, social partner, entrepreneur, and trade union, is a true honor to stay with you today. And I would stay to speak about the main topic of this event, reforming global governance for solidarity, equality, and sustainability. This must start with recognizing the role of civil society, ensuring that people, women, youth, workers, and local community, and people with disability are active shapers of the decisions that affect their lives. It's like a Sibonanga. You remember the Johnny Clegg song dedicated to Madiba. We have not seen him, but they hear the voice of him, the voice of the protester in the street. And the civil society have to give this message, their voice, loud and clear. The involvement of the civil society must happen in many transformations. For example, the artificial intelligence. We must ensure that artificial intelligence is built on human rights, transparency, accountability, and inclusive design. We call for human-centered ethical framework that prohibits social scoring and mass manipulation, while encouraging innovation that serve society. High governance must be global, and civil society must be engaged at each stage. Design, monitoring, oversight, not simple consultation. And in this way, we can neutralize the digital divide among people and among countries. A key tool for national economic development is to ensure a supportive financial system. And unfortunately, today, financial system is failing to meet the expectation. Many loved countries are in or near debt distress, forced to spend more on debt service than on education or health. The debt crisis has become one of the most pressing obstacles to inclusive and sustainable growth. The governance of global finance must become more inclusive, democratic, and responsive to African-led priority. And our committee called for a fairer global finance architecture, one that delivers debt transparency, effective restructuring, and innovation through debt for climate or debt for education swaps that link sustainability with social progress. Reforming global governance lies at the heart of the G20 summit. The current international order no longer reflects the reality of our interconnected world. We call for a reinvigorated multilateral system, one that is representative, transparent, and accountable for all, and not for a small number of a country. Our committee advocates for a transparent, efficient United Nations and for restructuring global finance to align with climate goals, moving beyond GDP and put at the center of our agenda the well-being of the citizen, not the GDP. as a measure of the progress. The G20 must become a platform not simple for state-to-state negotiation, but for people-to-people governance, where civil society has a real access and influence. Achieving these goals will require a long journey, and European civil society is ready now to embark on with you, not in front of you, not behind of you, but beside you. Asibonanga. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Palmieri, for those very poignant remarks. Next, I'd like to call to the podium Ms. Lebu Ramafoko, who is the director of Ramafoko Associates.
Program Director, distinguished guests, I stand on the protocol that has been established, and let me thank all of you, and I suspect it's all members of civil society who stayed until this late hour. As South Africa was preparing to welcome leaders from different parts of the world, women organizations organized by Women for Change, who are also here, organized women and firstly called that on Friday we withdraw our labor in solidarity to the many women that we have lost. And I'm standing here today just to emphasize that there can be no peace and prosperity in the world if women are not safe and they are free. Because indeed there is a war waged on women across the world. This is a global war that requires global attention. From 25 years ago, the UN Security Council took Resolution 1325, which amongst others, recognized the commitments made in the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which was taken 30 years ago, expressing concern that civilians, particularly women and children, are adversely affected by conflict, including as refugees, displaced persons, unemployed persons, persons living with disability, etc. And this resolution also recognized the central role that women play in the resolution of conflict in peace building. We all know the costs of GBV. It has economic cost, it has cost to the family structure, it creates instability, it's a development barrier. And different communities experience GBV differently, with rural women, women living with disabilities, facing more barriers to services, and in many instances, not being believed. And we believe that unless and until you resource community-based organizations, you will not be able to deal with the problem, because they are the ones that are closest to it and provide the most effective prevention and response. With the growth of digital, we have also seen new forms of violence emerging, and many countries will need to basically develop digital literacy and update laws on the different abuse that people face as a result of tech-enabled violence. But what aids and creates fertile ground for GBV is the lack of governance accountability. Through illicit financial flows, corruption, and a lack of many governments to lead justly and fairly, the poor have become poorer, exacerbating GBV in many communities. The other issue that is exacerbating GBV is climate change, where the world economies have excluded the world's 99% and have benefited the 1% richest people in the world. So what is the call? The call is for multilateralism, to put people and planet at the center, is to put the issue of GBV as one of the issues that will create lasting instability if we do not call to it. So today, although I can't speak to it because it is an initiative that was started by Women for Change is we are inviting all women and all civil society organizations to stand in solidarity with the 1 million people who heeded the call of Women for Change, for women to withdraw their labor on Friday, for all of us to gather in different places and say enough is enough. There is no global economy when more than 50% of the population do not feel safe. And this violence, it has a gender and it has a color. It is mostly Black women that are affected by gender-based violence. And we cannot allow wealthy countries that build their economies on extraction and exploitation refuse to support our countries with gender-based violence. But equally, we cannot allow our own governments to not show the political will, to not show the kind of commitment and resourcing that is needed to address this issue. It is a national disaster, and we call on our president to declare it as such and bring together all the resources that will focus on dealing with it. Enough is enough when 16 days is seen as a way of gathering civil society in buses, calling them, giving them t-shirts, giving them food, when in fact cases and rape kits are not in police stations and they go home to be beaten and raped. Thank you.
Ms. Lebo Ramafoko, you have really ignited the crowd, and everybody truly understands what you spoke about. In fact, you would have noted the purple color throughout social media in South Africa, because this is such a earnest and authentic plea from all corners, from men and women, to say we want to feel safe. We want to feel safe in our homes. We want to feel safe in our country. So thank you for those incredibly inspiring remarks. Next, I'd like to call to the podium. But first, before I call, are you still with me? Thank you very much. Thank you. Next, I'd like to call to the podium Ms. Sabrina Walter from Women for Change.
Good evening, honorable members, and I guess more civil society. My name is Sabrina Walter, and I'm the founder of Women for Change, an organization that has been fighting at the forefront of gender-based violence since 2016. I stand here today not as a founder, not as a director, but I stand as a woman, as an activist, and someone who deeply cares. Because in South Africa, gender-based violence and femicide is not just another issue, it is a national disaster. In just 1 year, 5,578 women were murdered in South Africa, an increase of 33.8% from the previous year. 117 rape cases are opened every single day at police stations across the country, while 95% will never be reported. Those are not just numbers, I remind you, those are mothers, daughters, sisters, women with dreams, women with names. Gender-based violence and femicide is not a crime problem. It's not a political issue. It is a human rights crisis, and the South African government is failing to respond with urgency and to its demands. On 11th of April this year, Women for Change carried an unburied casket to the Union buildings, handing over a petition for the government to declare gender-based violence and femicide a national disaster. 5 days later, the government announced a 90-day blitz. Since then, 7 months have passed, while another 3,300 women were murdered. But yet, once again, no urgency, nothing. Today, the petition, which is calling for gender-based violence and femicide to be declared a national disaster, has grown over 1 million signatures. 1 million pleas, 1 million cries for help. 1 million people saying enough is enough. And still, we are waiting for action. So this Friday, the 21st of November, women in South Africa and members of the LGBTQI+ community, and by now, members from all over Africa and all over the world will stand against gender-based violence and femicide. We are wearing black. We are not going to work. We are not doing unpaid labor. And we as women will not spend money on Friday. At 12 p.m., the nation will fall into a complete 15-minute shutdown, 1 minute for every woman murdered each day. And lastly, I want to say thank you to the millions of people across the world who have turned their profile pictures purple to stand in solidarity with us and the women in South Africa. Buildings and shopping centers lit up purple, thousands of survivors sharing their story every single day. And allies from Africa, Europe, Asia, the US are standing with us. The world has heard us, and now South African leaders must finally listen. Thank you.
That is a truly painful statistic, 50 women every single day. Thank you very much, Ms. Sabrina Walter, for your commitment to driving change and keeping us safe as women. Thank you very much. We saved the best for last. A lady I know very well who is deeply passionate and a social activist in South Africa for so many reasons. I'd like to call to the stage Dr. Sindiswa Mzamo, who's the global president for Circle of Women.
Thank you very much, Program Director. And I'm rising on existing protocols. And I'm the last one in the session. And also to actually talk about what is economic empowerment? What is financial inclusion? Because that's very important for us as women to understand that financial inclusion is very important. Economic empowerment is very important. And we've been working with the South African government. I'm also the co-chair of G20. And in our last inception meeting, we hosted global women leaders with all the countries of G20, including the US. And we agreed that there is nothing about us without us as women, which is, I am because you are. And that's very important to make sure that as we rise to the occasion, to the G20 summit, who are we as women leaders? What do we stand for? We stand for financial inclusion. We stand for the K economy. Well, we stand for gender-based violence. And also, if you look at the whole powerful 3 sessions or 3 priorities of the G20 Women Working Group, it's financial inclusion, it's the K economy, it's gender-based violence. As Women 20, all the heads of delegation that came from all the 20 countries, we dealt with this powerful issue of actually saying that we need to focus on empowering women in our member states through access to markets, through access to finance. And just now this afternoon, I was attending a session with the World Economic Forum where I was speaking as a global leader. Where they've just launched a session called The State of Social Enterprises, which is unlocking the inclusive growth and jobs and development in Africa. Guess what? 55% of these entities, they are women-led. 37% of these entities are youth-led in Africa. And let's give a round of applause for that. We are definitely advancing, and South Africa is leading. Also, in closing, Program Director, this is a G20 for Africa. As the South Africa presidency, when South Africa called African leaders to actually support Africa. But there's one thing that we need to talk about, the issue of global financial restructuring. My brother said it here. We are actually talking about a challenge that we have on debt crisis. There are countries in the continent right now that are servicing debt. There are countries right now in the continent that cannot invest in infrastructure, that cannot invest in education because they're debt servicing. Illicit flows, we're talking about 90 billion that is actually being taken out of Africa. As women of Africa, we are saying no. Let us actually make sure that we stop the illicit flows. And with those words, Program Director, I'd like to say thank you very much. I am because you are. And that is the mandate we are carrying as global women. And that's a mandate that we are carrying as W20 and making sure that as we lead our global leaders, as we start discussing, engaging tomorrow on our thematic areas, coming up with a declaration, we are definitely going to put women, youth, and people with disabilities at the center of the declaration. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, the best was saved for last. Thank you very much. Another round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the key question is, as we progress to Agenda 2063, and we're looking to become one of the leading economies in the world, we're going to see a lot of change. We're going to see a lot of industries coming into our country. We can see now currently all the summits, everything being here in Africa, right? It's not a coincidence. It is because everyone can see the growth that is coming. The questions we have to ask and the questions that are being asked is, what is the social impact? How do we ensure that we not once again get left behind? That the most vulnerable, that the poorest and the marginalized of our communities are continuously just that, the poor and the marginalized. So it is imperative that we ask key questions. It is imperative that we participate in our own economic growth instead of just watching others profit from us as Africa. Thank you very much. I'm Cleola Kunene, and it was my privilege to be your program director this evening.